Jacob Blake was shot on August 24th in a town called Kenosha, a city of Wisconsin 40 miles south of Milwaukee. Of all the cities in Wisconsin, already notorious as one of the most racially disparate states in America, where black people account for 6% of the population and 24% of the COVID-19 deaths, there lies three of the most prominent cities for blacks in Wisconsin: Racine, Milwaukee, and Kenosha. Yet, according to former player Karam Butler, who hails from Racine County, Racine and Kenosha are two of the most segregated cities in the country. He even went ahead and likened it to cities in the Deep South. He has a story actually, where in Kenosha, if you take a certain highway as a black person, then you're more than certain to get pulled over. So to go to a favorite restaurant of his and his grandmother's, he has to take an alternative route that takes 7 miles longer, just to avoid an altercation. As an NBA player, I might add. That's what it's like over there. Well, we still don't know the full situation over the shooting of Jacob Blake, and while it still looks like the police have a sliver of justification, given a man walking unspoken towards his vehicle after an altercation, we can still safely assume that there was bias in that policeman's heart. After all, how else could that happen? The Milwaukee Bucks knew, just as about every other black person in America. The difference between them and us, of course, is that the Bucks have power. They are one of the most influential groups in the United States. Just as Jackie Robinson became famous and a staple of American history for facing on and breaking the color barrier in 1947, the Milwaukee Bucks were faced with a precedent that had not yet been broken in an unprecedented time. Unlike the predecessors of the movement that fought so bravely, ignited by the college students in Greensboro who sat at the whites-only dine-in, these men aren't going to be ridiculed by the public. They won't be pepper sprayed. They won't have food thrown at them. They won't be spat on. The worst that they'll have are words, and a lot of them, but mostly online. As a highly celebrated and successful basketball team spearheaded by the National Basketball Association's most valuable player, and perhaps most importantly being an NBA franchise, they have already been famous. They didn't need to be made famous. So when they finally did break the precedent, they made waves. Unlike Jackie Robinson, whom after him only brought a trickle of effort to try and make things equal, the Milwaukee Bucks, the 16 men that made the decision to not play that day, opened the doors. Or perhaps pressured them open. Either way, it's a victory. Now, let me get one thing straight before we continue. The Bucks were not the only team with this idea. The teams that were scheduled to play on August 26th all had come to a general agreement to not play games that day. But the thing is, they're supposed to have a united statement released to the press. One of the main reasons for the LeBron walkout was that Milwaukee jumped the gun. Milwaukee had their own ideas, which was justified given that the shooting happened in their own backyard. The Bucks players in the locker room went to speak with the Attorney General of Wisconsin, Josh Kaul, and the Lieutenant Governor, Mandela Barnes, two people with a lot of legal power and far more experience in the industry than everyone else could or should have. Josh Kaul said what they did that day was very impactful.
The Bucks have frankly done more to address these issues than Robin Voss or Scott Fitzgerald have done.
But the Bucks didn't just affect the state of Wisconsin. The NBA, meaning the individual teams and players, not the actual league, shifted sports that day. In the hours passing after George Hill, Sterling Brown, and the rest of the members decided not to play, the Thunder and the Rockets canceled their game. Then so did the Lakers and the Blazers. And officially, the NBA playoffs were put on hold. Then came the other sports leagues. Major League Baseball, with a black player population of just 8%, postponed 10 games on Wednesday and Thursday. The WNBA that day went out to the court, kneeled in shirts that portrayed the bullet holes of Jacob Blake, and then returned to the locker room. They also postponed. Even Major League Soccer postponed 5 games, and the NHL, perhaps the most racist sport in America, put an in-game announcement denouncing racism and eventually postponed games as well. Even Naomi Osaka, a recent #1 tennis player in the world, declared that she wouldn't play a game that she had scheduled for the next day. The NFL even had teams cancel practice, from the Detroit Lions, of which came from an emotional team meeting, to even Washington and Chicago, while other teams canceled practice as well. 2 meetings in the NBA were quickly assembled, one for the players just 4 hours after the initial strike, and a meeting comprised of the 30 governors of the NBA, plus Adam Silver, and representatives from the Players Association. The premise is to use the social and economic economic power these games bring, not just in basketball but also soccer, baseball, and even football, as a bargaining chip for change. For Milwaukee, that means passing a police reform bill in Wisconsin that was proposed over 2 months ago and never voted on, likely due to the reluctance of Republican members in the state Congress to ratify it. With names like Giannis and Chris Middleton and Mark Lazary and Wes Edens, 2 owners of the Milwaukee Bucks, behind the charge, a bill that was meant only to be a performance will actually be put into action. But for a moment, let's talk straight. Other than Michael Jordan, these owners don't really care about the plights that are happening in the black community, as long as they're still turning a profit. It's not their fault, it's human nature, which has been amplified in these people that are cold and calculating enough to amass billions of dollars. If something is not directly affecting you, then it is very easy to simply ignore it. For example, there's a crisis in Yemen right now, there's deadly price inflation in Cuba, and there are over 1 billion people without constant access to clean water. You don't think about these things on a daily or monthly or even yearly basis if you're not prompted by someone or something else. Think like the donations to charities that they have at the end of the line at a Starbucks or Wendy's. You're inclined to donate what you have because you've been prompted, but you're not gonna take any action beyond that. In that case, you're the billionaire compared to that starving child in Asia. Someone with so much money available, but so uncaring in actually giving it away. Now, naturally, there are exceptions to that rule. Many people are generous, whether or not that's prompted from religion or personal experiences or just being naturally inclined to benevolence. For these actual billionaires, though, none of that applies. To amass over $1 billion of wealth and reinvest that money into a sports team, well, that requires an unusual amount of selfishness. Whether that comes with the process of amassing the money or if someone's simply born like that, it doesn't really matter. Bottom line is, they're concerned by what directly affects them. That's how they're able to grow and keep their large amounts of wealth. Whether or not the players play is something that affects all the people in the league, and more particularly the owners. They have incentive now to go beyond just words, or giving just a speck of their money, an equivalent to that leftover dollar of change that you have at the proverbial Starbucks. Now the players, taking something that directly affects them, are using their platform and most valuable asset, their availability, and turning the issue into something that the owners have to care about, or they'll be losing a lot of money. And none of them would like that. Take those 30 owners and multiply it by about 4. That's how much potential power that's been unlocked by the players with this temporary strike. Those 120 individuals are some of the most influential in America behind the scenes. And when they have incentive, the legislators, the DAs, the police departments, and even the federal government will listen. Remember that money always talks. LeBron James brings these people a lot of money. So does Giannis Antetokounmpo, and so does the Los Angeles Clippers. If LeBron decided against the wishes of the rest of the league, of whom sacrificed so much already to just be there, the league would have shut down, especially if the Clippers would have followed. And LeBron was more than willing and ready to do it. If the owners on the second meeting didn't propose forceful enough regimens to help the black community, more than the $1 million pledges by billionaire owners with billion-dollar sports teams each year, more than honestly the ugly Black Lives Matter sentence that they have on the courts, more than just saying that they were ready to listen or whatever else to simply appease the customer, then LeBron would have been out, and the billion-dollar operation would have headed out of Orlando with him. Thanks to some counseling though, which included the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, LeBron went into the meeting knowing full well what he wanted, and the owners went in knowing full well what they could lose. The owners were put into pressure, finally, months after I thought that Kyrie's plan to cancel the season would have done it for them, which obviously it didn't. It took a stance of unity, spearheaded by the league's best teams and its most powerful player, in order to apply real pressure. The results, which are still very vague under the less than a day time frame that everyone had to draw it all up, are going to have to prove themselves to be effective or not. But when a lot of money is at risk, things tend to work out. The players, particularly the Milwaukee Bucks, maybe not realizing it at first, instead drawing upon the emotion that they had, were able to hit a soft spot, a chink in the armor, in the power structure of the National Basketball Association. Jacob Blake's shooting wasn't just another horrible incident. It was the act that finally jolted the players to more than words, and actually into action. The NBA yet again, this time led by the players, continued to lead 2020. Now what happens next, only time will tell. But I'll leave it with a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. "The arc of the moral universe is long, yet it always skews towards justice." Thanks for watching.